So can Boise State make the New Year's Six? That is the discussion point of this video today. I'm going to lay out a path that Boise State could take to getting to the New Year's Six this year as the representative for the group of five. And we're going to ask, what would it take for Boise State to make that game? And I'll give a prediction at the end on whether or not I think that's going to happen. This is going to be a very exciting discussion because I love the analytical, the theoretical, and that is what this video is all about, because it's a lot of what ifs. But if all those what ifs come together, Boise State might have a chance here, and we're going to talk about that in this video. So Boise State 8-3 coming into this game, took a couple early season losses, turned things around. New offensive coordinator came in. Tim Plow out the door. Dirk Cutter elevated offensive coordinator. New quarterback comes in. Hank Bachmeier leaves the program. Taylor Green comes in. So it is a very very honestly, completely different team than started the year. Will that have an effect on their chances to get to New Year's Six? Let's look at what it would take. Boise State going to take on Utah State this week, and then Fresno State in the Mountain West Championship game. They've already earned their way in that Mountain West Championship game. A Fresno State team that's not going to be ranked or anything, but a chance for Boise State to get to 10-3 and be the Mountain West champions. If they did that, if they win big against Utah State and Fresno State and are 10-3, do they have a shot? Here's what would have to happen. So laying the groundwork, presumption is having this discussion. Boise State is sitting at 10-3 with two big wins, and I'm talking, 3 touchdowns or more type of wins, hopefully, versus Utah State and Fresno State. And now they're sitting at 10-3 as the Mountain West champions. Can the Mountain West champion Boise State in that scenario make it into the New Year's Six? Here's the first thing that would have to happen. You would have to assume that the MAC and Conference USA are out of the picture. So the MAC conference, their best team is 8-3, widely seen as the worst conference in college football. That one can be safely presumed to be out. So that's check number one, MAC out of the picture. Conference USA, the second weakest conference in college football, and definitely a conference that doesn't have a strong shot of making it into the New Year's Six, regardless of what happens. Their best team, UTSA, is 9-2 with 2 losses out of conference to teams that were ranked at the time, but they play in an extremely weak conference, and already the CFP has shown bias against that conference last season and has shown it throughout the existence so far of the college football playoff poll, and there's not a lot of name brand recognition for these teams, which is important. With a biased human voter system, that name recognition is important. We'll talk about that later here for Boise State. So you could probably assume that Conference USA, without an undefeated team or a one-loss team, is out of the rankings. To be safe, to get this a real solid check mark, you would probably need UTSA to lose to whatever team represents probably North Texas at this point, but to lose in their conference championship game, in the Conference USA conference championship game. That would make this really safe, but you are probably okay presuming that Conference USA and MAC are out of the picture. So number one has to happen. Number one has mostly happened already. Safest bet would be for UTSA to lose, but we say that number one has been achieved. So key number one, have to assume MAC and Conference USA are out of the picture. Second, Sunbelt needs to knock itself out of the picture, out of the discussion. To do that, Coastal Carolina, who is the best favorite there, 9-1, a team with national recognition, a media darling, who definitely has a chance if they could go undefeated here. They need to lose to JMU, who definitely could do it. They've had a great first season in the FBS. They need to lose to JMU that might be enough. If Coastal Carolina loses to JMU and then wins the conference championship, but has that loss to JMU, sitting at 10-2 there, or sitting at 11-2, public math, sorry. So it's sitting there at 11-2, but they have the loss. No, it'd be 10-2 because they had a game canceled. Yeah, because they had the game versus UVA canceled. So sitting at 10-2 with a loss to JMU, that might be enough, even if they're conference champions. But again, to be safe, if Coastal Carolina loses to JMU and or loses to Troy / South Alabama, both those teams 9-2, but teams that are not going to be in the conversation to get into the CFP rankings. Again, human voters, BCS poll might have a shot, but CFP, not a chance with the way that these voters have worked and have shown that they worked. Those two teams, even though they're both sitting at 9-2, probably not going to have a shot at getting into the CFP this season. So if Coastal Carolina loses to JMU and or loses to Troy / South Carolina, Sunbelt would knock itself out of contention. So now all you got to deal with is the American Athletic Conference. Now that's a tough one because right now CFP hasn't come out. But right now, you have 3 teams. It hasn't come out as the time of the shooting this video. Probably by the time you watch this, it's come out. But right now, it's 3 teams in the top 25. So 3 teams in the top 25. What needs to happen here for the American Athletic Conference to have all 3 of those teams knock themselves out of the list? Well, first has already happened, and Navy beat UCF. That was huge. That was a terrible, terrible loss to a terrible, terrible Navy team. That could potentially knock UCF out of contention here. So Cincinnati would need to beat Tulane. Both those teams are playing this week for the chance to go to their American Athletic Conference championship game. Whoever wins that game will be one of the teams that represents for sure in the American Athletic Conference. So Cincinnati needs to beat Tulane because Cincinnati's already taken a loss and Tulane is ranked higher and they're probably the favorite here to be able to get a chance to go in and win. If Tulane beats Cincinnati, even if the other team that represents the American Athletic Conference wins, Tulane could still have a chance here of boosting that secondary team up into the conference championship game because Tulane would be ranked high enough. You know, they win against Cincinnati, and that pushes them into the top 15 range. And then, say UCF or something comes in and beats them, that might be enough to elevate UCF in. So they need the 25th ranked at this time of this video, Cincinnati, to beat Tulane. And Cincinnati's sitting here with 2 losses as well. Then they need UCF to win versus USF so that they represent over Tulane, UCF to win versus USF, and then beat Cincinnati in a razor-thin, very, very close game. So UCF sitting then at that point with a loss, a recent loss, not an early season loss, a late season loss to Navy, and then a very close win against Cincinnati. UCF probably not ranked at this point, especially with that loss to Navy hanging and pulling them down. If the CFP chooses not to elevate UCF after beating Cincinnati, this could be an opportunity for another team to step in. This is probably the biggest question mark overall because American Athletic Conference plays off of the East Coast bias, so they are going to get the benefit of the doubt. They don't need, most other conferences need an undefeated team. Mountain West in most years probably needs at least a 1-loss team. American Athletic Conference only needs really a 2-loss team most years to have a chance to get into the New Year's Six because of playing off the East Coast bias, and especially now that you have these teams, UCF and Cincinnati, that we're talking about, moving into the Power 5 here in a year or a couple of years. They, depending on how everything works out, trying to get in early. But moving into the Power 5, they are now playing off of the Power 5 bias because they are now viewed as related to the Power 5 teams in Power 5 Ascension. So they have both of those bias factors working for them here. Even with everything I've talked about, UCF winning versus Cincinnati might be enough to send UCF to be the New Year's Six rep. So this is the biggest what if. Of all the what ifs on this list, you wouldn't think that this would be the biggest, but this is the biggest what if. UCF has to beat Cincinnati. Cincinnati has to be the team that they are going up against. So not a super high ranked Tulane, but a barely ranked Cincinnati. And they have to win, but only barely. So it's not considered a major win. And then the committee has to look at that loss to Navy, that late season loss, and say, man, we're going to keep you out of the rankings because of that. And it wouldn't hurt to have Navy lose to Army, so then it's a Navy team that's even worse overall. That is the ideal situation. If that happens, if Boise State gets a check mark on that, moves past that, now we get into a little bit of a discussion here because now we're talking about how the committee views Boise State. So first off, Boise State would have to benefit from what I like to call the Ohio State 2014 exemption. Ohio State 2014 loses early in the season to Virginia Tech. I believe it was their first game, it was like first or second game, loses to Virginia Tech. However, comes the rest of the year, has a great year, wins the Big Ten, goes to the New Year's Six. The committee stated, I'm not quoting them, this is a little bit more of a paraphrasing type of thing, but they stated that the early season loss wasn't a damning thing. You could lose early in the season as long as you proved you were a different team by the end, as long as you came through and you won your games and you proved you were a different team by the end. They take the whole season into account. They say, what were you at the beginning of the year? Are you that same team? If you have shown that you are a different team and your record shows that you are better than what you started, they're going to look at you overall and say, is this team, not this record, but is this team worthy of being in that case, the college football playoffs, but also in the New Year's Six overall? So Boise State would have to benefit from that because remember, early season loss opened up a loss to Oregon State, and then they lose to UTEP. Those were major, devastating losses that really shook the program to its core. Not just the football program, but the fan base really had a little bit of a, what are we now? I mean, we didn't feel like Boise State. Boise State fires Tim Plow. Hank Bachmeier leaves. They are quite literally a different team than they started the season. They absolutely are a different team. Quite literally, the offensive coordinator is calling completely different plays than they were at the beginning of the year. They're playing completely differently. They've only lost one game since that loss to UTEP, and they are now made their way up here to 8-3. They are a completely different team. They've had back-to-back 300-yard rushing games, which they've never seen earlier in the season. They've had some major wins in this run here to getting into the Mountain West Championship game. And if they then beat Utah State and Fresno State by big margins, now they're sitting at 10-3 with 2 early season losses that don't reflect this team at all. They are quite literally a different program, different quarterback, different coach. Now, the committee needs to lean hard into that different team concept. Not just the full season concept, but the different team concept. In the past, teams have won a game, but their starting quarterback has gotten hurt, and they've actually dropped in the rankings because the committee said, well, you're not the team that beat that team. Overall, you're not as good as you were. So we're going to evaluate you as what you bring to the table as a team overall. Again, this is a terrible, biased, absolutely fraudulent system. But it's human people, and that's what they're doing. So everybody said, no, we don't like the BCS. We want bias in our ranking system, and that's what we've got. But that's what they do. They look at it and they say, okay, yeah, you won. That was a great win for you, but you lost your starting quarterback. So sorry, we're going to move you down a couple spots in the rankings versus moving you up 5 or 6. If that could work in the negative, it could theoretically work in the positive. Yeah, all right, you lost early on in the season, but you've got a different quarterback now. You've got a brand new offensive coordinator and a brand new quarterback, and you are a completely different team. They have to lean hard into that. The third factor in this kind of speculative part of this chain is Boise State's name needs to carry clout. Again, this is a biased system, so it's how people feel about your team. It's about how the emotions run. This isn't about statistics. This isn't about facts. This is about how a committee of elites look at you and go, wow, I really feel strongly about this program. It's a terrible system. It would never happen in the BCS era. The BCS era, Boise State would have no shot of getting into this New Year's Six. So even though it's a terrible system and I absolutely hate it, hey, Boise State's actually in the discussion here where they wouldn't be in the BCS. But Boise State, needs to be able to play into that bias. Boise State's name still carries some clout. It needs to, in order for Boise State to even have a chance at this discussion. No other Mountain West team sitting at 10-3 would have even a chance at having the possibility of being pushed up into the rankings here. But Boise State, they're a team that people want to do well based on what they've done in the past. I mean, their name still carries a lot of emotive feelings from what Boise State has been able to do as kind of, that initial BCS buster years and what they were able to do after that. Boise State's name still carries national recognition. They still are able to play a little bit into the bias factor. So the bias factor has got to play in their favor here for Boise State to have a chance. If all of those things happen, and the biggest one there is the AAC knocking themselves out and the committee not putting UCF up, and then looking at a UCF team that's probably unranked and a Boise State team that's also probably on the edge of also being unranked. So 2 teams that are either unranked or right on the cusp, and saying this team lost. This is really what it comes up to. UCF versus Boise State. This team lost late in the season. The team that beat Cincinnati is the same team that lost to Navy. This team that won the Mountain West, that is, had a great run here through the back half of the season, has lost to BYU, but honestly, that loss is not as bad as a loss to Navy. But the team that lost to UTEP is not the same team. This is a completely different team, and they have to say this team deserves to be here more based on our biases, based on our human feelings, based on everything else that I talked about. They have to make that call. So the chances, you're telling me there's a chance. The chance is so small. But there is a theoretical path for Boise State to be able to be in the discussion to get into New Year's Six, and that's all I want. Honestly, right now, as a Boise State fan, to be able to talk about the theoretical possibility that Boise State could be in a New Year's Six, no matter how remote that is, based on how they started the season, based on the fact that they went 7-5 last year, the fact that I can even have this discussion where I can draw up this ladder and we can go step by step and show that there is a theoretical path, that's awesome. That's incredible. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I don't think Boise State's going to New Year's Six. I think they're going to go play a Pac-12 team, and I hope, I got to say that. They have to win the Mountain West first. So going off of this, I think they would go play a Pac-12 team. We'll see if I'm predicting a win after this Utah State game when I preview Boise State versus Fresno State. So do I think they're going to go to the New Year's Six? No, I don't. But the fact that they have a chance to be in that discussion and to get the country talking about them again and to set themselves up for next year, come in, they'll have a new offensive coordinator, they'll have a offense that has really worked on and built some things and some superstars in the making. This could be a team that could start that early season hype, get into the AP poll, which is all important now. Everybody likes to talk about the AP poll doesn't matter. Oh, it matters, because based on how highly ranked teams are at the beginning of the year, determines, especially for the group of 5, determines your ceiling. You come in, you get people talking about you, you get the bias factor running early, you start off high in the AP poll. By the time the CFP comes out, if you're undefeated, you have a chance of being able to actually be in that conversation and push into the CFP as a highly ranked team. You start off unranked, American Athletic Conference gets in ahead of you with some ranked teams, and they start pushing up and not losing, and you both have the same records. Guess who the CFP is going to look at with the similar records and put ahead? The unranked West Coast team or the barely ranked but ranked East Coast team? They're going to put that team ahead regardless of what these records are down here. So Boise State, the fact that they're in this discussion is awesome. Are they a serious contender? No, they're not. The American Athletic Conference is going to be the team. American Athletic Conference is going to represent in the New Year's Six. But it could happen. There's a theoretical chance. And again, the way that Boise State started, the fact that we can have this discussion, that's awesome. This fan base it's been so exciting to watch the fan base kind of move forward past what happened early in the season and actually have hope again. And that's all it takes to be a Boise State fan, really, is to have just an absolutely undying hope and faith that your team is going to come back the next year and take you to being nationally prominent, take you to a contender for the New Year's Six and beyond. And I think that we can strongly base our hopes and our faith on that as Boise State builds forward. And it's exciting to be able to be at that point again here as a Boise State fan. So thanks so much for watching my video. Let me know what you think. This was a fun discussion. This is kind of one of those just fun fan discussions. You're sitting around the tailgate and you're talking about it and you go, what if? This is what being a fan is all about, these type of discussions. So I loved having this opportunity to talk with you about it. Let me know what you think. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you watch my preview that I just did for Boise State versus Utah State, and again for the Mountain West Championship game here in about a week. So the preview in about a week and the game itself in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for watching. As always, like, subscribe, and go Big Blue!